Have you ever noticed something curious about the number $1 million? It shows up in conversations, in movies, in interviews, and even in discussions about financial futures, as if it were a magical line that separates two completely different lives. On one side is ordinary life, full of bills, monthly payments, end-of-month worries, and that constant feeling that money always seems to slip through your fingers. On the other side would be a peaceful life, where money finally stops being a problem and a person could simply breathe without fear of the future. But let me ask you a very direct question, and maybe a slightly uncomfortable one. What if the number that so many people consider the finish line isn't actually enough to guarantee peace of mind for very long? Think with me for a few seconds. For years, sometimes for decades, a person works imagining that moment. The moment when the accumulated money finally reaches the number that always seemed impossible. 1 million. Just hearing that number already creates an image of security, stability, and rest after a lot of effort. But almost no one stops to imagine what it actually feels like to depend on that money once it's already saved. Because while you're working, there is a quiet detail happening every single month that many people don't even notice. The money that comes in regularly creates a psychological sense of security. Even when the salary isn't high, even when the month is tight, even when there's very little left after paying the bills, something is happening that the brain interprets as stability. There is flow, there is movement. Every month, something comes in. That simple fact reduces part of financial anxiety without us even realizing it. Now imagine the mental shift that happens when that flow stops. Suddenly, the logic of financial life completely flips. Before, money came in and then it was distributed among bills, needs, and small desires. Now there is a stockpile of accumulated money, and every expense represents a permanent withdrawal from that stockpile. A paycheck doesn't come in every month anymore. There's no more payment for day-to-day work. That automatic mechanism that replenishes the money that left no longer exists. And that's the moment when many people discover something they had never imagined before. Having a lot of money saved can create a different kind of anxiety, because when you look at that accumulated amount, the brain starts asking a silent question all the time while this left. That question seems simple, but it carries enormous weight, because unlike other phases of life, in retirement time begins to take on a completely different dimension. Let's imagine a very common situation. A person retires at age 60. They look at their account and see a number that took decades to build. $1 million. It seems like a lot of money. It seems like something that would solve any worry. But now comes a part of the equation that almost no one calculates when they are only dreaming about that number. How long does that money need to last? If that person lives to 85, we're talking about 25 years. If they live to 90, that's 30 years. Now imagine dividing that money over 30 years of life. And it's not simply dividing it, because there's a silent factor that keeps working against that money all the time. The cost of living keeps rising. The price of things doesn't stay still. Food goes up. Services go up. Home maintenance becomes more expensive. Health tends to require more attention as the years pass. Everything keeps increasing, while that money has to keep up with that movement for decades. This is where one of the most important retirement concepts appears, something many people only discover when they begin studying the subject more deeply. There is a widely known idea that suggests withdrawing a relatively small amount from your savings each year to increase the chances that the money will last a long time. Many people talk about something close to 4% per year. That means that for the money to have a chance of keeping up with time, a person couldn't simply spend freely what they accumulate. They would need to withdraw small portions each year, while keeping the rest invested to try to preserve its value over the decades. When we apply this idea to the famous number of $1 million, we arrive at something around $40,000 per year. Now let's bring that into the practical reality of everyday life. $40,000 per year divided by 12 months represents approximately $3,300 per month. At first glance, that might seem like a lot of money, but depending on where a person lives, that amount can quickly start to feel less comfortable than it seemed at the beginning of the conversation. Now, add real life to that equation. Electricity bills, internet, groceries, transportation, insurance, taxes, home maintenance, small emergencies that appear without warning. A problem with the car, an unexpected repair, a piece of equipment that breaks, and especially something that many people forget to consider when they make retirement plans, healthcare costs. As the years go by, even when there is no serious illness, health expenses usually increase. Doctor visits, exams, medications, preventive treatments, all of that tends to appear more often. Now imagine living for decades knowing that every expense comes directly from the amount that needs to support the rest of your life. That kind of thinking begins to turn simple decisions into emotional decisions. Buying something stops being just buying. Traveling stops being just traveling. Often an automatic calculation appears inside your head. If I spend this now, will I miss that money 15 years from now? Am I spending too fast? Am I being irresponsible with my own future? This type of reasoning creates a very curious psychological phenomenon. Some people begin spending less than they could, not because they have to, but because they feel fear. Even having enough money, even having prepared for decades, even having accumulated much more than the average person, the fear of seeing their savings shrink creates a constant sense of vigilance. It's as if the money were slowly evaporating, and the more the person looks at it, the stronger that feeling becomes. There is a characteristic of human behavior that helps explain this. The human brain feels the pain of losing money much more intensely than it feels the joy of gaining money. That means watching your wealth decrease can feel emotionally heavier than it seemed when the person was only accumulating it. While the money was growing, the dominant feeling was progress. But when the money starts shrinking, even in a planned way, the feeling can be completely different. That's why more and more experts have started changing the way they talk about retirement. For a long time, the conversation was always about reaching a number. 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. As if there were a magical line that, once crossed, would solve all of life's financial problems. But over the years, many people began to realize that the number alone doesn't solve everything. The most important point isn't just how much money is accumulated, but how that money behaves over time. That means looking at something much more important than a value sitting still in an account. It means looking at income flow. In other words, where the money comes from after traditional work slows down or stops. When there is only an accumulated amount, all the pressure is on it. But when there are small sources of income happening at the same time, even if they are smaller, the situation changes completely. It could be income from investments that generate regular payments. It could be a small job that no longer requires the same intensity as before. It could be consulting, freelancing, some type of activity a person does at a much lighter pace. It could be anything that continues creating some financial flow over time. When money keeps coming in, even in smaller amounts, the brain understands that the financial system of that person's life is still working, that the money isn't simply disappearing. That simple difference completely changes the psychological feeling of security. Perhaps the biggest mindset shift about money in the coming years won't be about how much to accumulate, but about how to build a financial life that doesn't depend only on a number sitting in an account. Because at the end of the day, true financial peace rarely comes only from having money saved. It comes from the feeling that you have options. The option to slow down the pace of work, the option to work fewer hours, the option to choose projects that actually make sense, the option to say no to situations that used to be mandatory because of financial necessity. Very often this freedom begins to appear long before someone reaches the famous $1 million. When a person learns to organize money better, control spending, build reserves, and create small sources of income over time, something begins to change inside the mind. The anxiety decreases. The feeling of financial desperation decreases. Clarity increases. And money stops being just a distant number that maybe someday will be reached and starts becoming a tool that helps build a calmer and more predictable life. If this conversation made you see money in a slightly different way, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. And if you made it this far, comment the word freedom. That way I know you watched until the end and that this type of reflection is really helping. You think more clearly about your financial future.